Your government has done a fantastic job of standing around, claiming that it is taking steps to address the unacceptable instances of sexual harassment in our armed forces. In the past 12 months, sexual misconduct in our Canadian armed forces has doubled, and this government has failed. The political leaders of a self-described feminist government, including the Prime Minister and now 3 Ministers of Defence, should be ashamed of themselves in their failure to not just stem the flow of institutionalized violence against our young men and women, but being a passive and indifferent observer to its growth. Over the past 8 years, survivors and experts have been shouting from the rooftops. Justice Deschamps warned in 2015, Justice Fish warned in 2021, Justice Arbour warned in 2022. And your government's response? Cut $1 billion and establish a panel to review military colleges, a panel that your office delayed in creating because you couldn't find 7 experts. You spoke to this yesterday. The experts are the survivors, the young men and women on the receiving end of catcalls, the troops who found themselves in a darkened hallway with a drunk superior at the Christmas party, the women who were pinned up against the bulkhead of a ship and raped. The experts, Minister, are the men and women under your charge who are emotionally, mentally, and physically violated. As a mother myself, I would find it extremely difficult to justify approving my children joining your Canadian Armed Forces, an organization that has no place for them to live, not sufficient money to pay them, no equipment for them to use, all overseen by a government with no respect for their autonomy. Responsibility starts and stops with your political leadership. And after 8 years of inaction and gutting, as a new minister, you have a lot of work to do. So on top of the $1 billion cuts, Minister, why has your government, despite allegedly taken steps to address sexual misconduct, allowed instances of sexual harassment to double, Minister, in a single year in the CAF?
2 minutes and 30 seconds, so you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you very much. Let me just back up a little bit. And the report that was released by StatsCan yesterday actually involved surveys that were taken for 23,000 members of the Canadian Armed Forces between October 2021 and October 2022. Listen, I accept completely the concerns that were raised. I also I think it's important. The Canadian Armed Forces is one of the only institutions in the country, one of the few in the world, that actually is gathering this information and speaking to their own people. And as I mentioned earlier, General Kramp-Neuman has also consulted with 9,000 members of the force on the steps that are necessary. I appreciate the partisan perspective on what has been done, but I
Excuse me, Minister, if I may. The victims that I'm speaking about, the survivors, must become victors. So what motivation do we have to retain current members and recruit future heroes if we're allowing this to happen?
Please continue.
Thank you. I would offer a slightly different perspective, and it's not mine. It's the perspective of Madam Justice Arbour, who I've spoken to a number of times on these matters, and more importantly, our external monitor, Madame Terrien, who has been given the important job of monitoring the progress on, and she's issued 2 very important reports. I'd invite members of this committee to familiarize themselves with those reports, because I do think it clearly articulates the hard work and the progress that is being made. And we have now taken some very significant steps in response to those recommendations. Just yesterday, as the member indicated, we stood up a review panel for the military colleges at both at RMC in Kingston and at Saint Jean. The work and the expertise, and I would invite the members of this committee to take a good hard look at who we've appointed there.
If I may, Minister, just in the nature of time.
I'm trying to be equal in time here, so I'm going to have to let him respond.
I believe I have 5 minutes, right?
You're down to 20 seconds.
Okay, so my last question is, in your opening comments, Minister, you acknowledge that the priority for you is the men and women in the CAF to be respected and protected. Do you feel that's happening?
Yes, ma'am, I do. And if I may, let me go back to the thing. I'd invite the members to familiarize themselves with the work that has been done, the panel that's now been stood up. I think there's been a great deal of work to be done, and let me also acknowledge there's much more work to do. But the member also asked, Ms. Kramp also asked, about some of the investments that we're making in the Canadian Armed Forces. I would remind her and this committee that in 2012, Canada's expenditure on defense dropped to 1%, the lowest in our country's history. It was only passed more in 2013.
Thank you,
when it
Minister.
actually fell below 1%. We've been digging out of a very deep hole left to us since then.